All right. Welcome, everyone, to another deep dive.
Yeah, excited for this one.
We're going to be tackling the India growth story today, and we're going to be looking at this DD India article from February 4th, 2025.
Look forward to it.
This was written by Navroop Singh, an intellectual property attorney and geopolitical analyst. It really kind of gets into a lot of the details of what's happening in India and how they're approaching their economic trajectory, the strategic moves the government is making.
Right. And I think this is one of those things where, we hear a lot about China and their growth and what they're doing. But India's kind of quietly just doing their own thing. And it's very impressive.
Yeah, it's very impressive.
Yeah.
So for anyone listening, this is going to be a really good kind of primer, I guess, on what is driving this growth, what initiatives are taking place in India, how these things are shaping the global economy, because this really is a big global shift.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at India's current economic standing, the kind of things that are powering their growth, particularly this shift into manufacturing.
Right.
The impact of government policies like Make in India and PLI schemes, and even the Fourth Industrial Revolution and how that might play a role.
Right.
So where should we even begin with all of this? This is a really, really big picture.
Yeah. So I think, maybe we can start with kind of like setting the scene, like what is the current economic landscape in India?
Okay.
And as the article points out, I mean, India is a huge country. It's
Yeah.
the world's largest democracy, but it's also one of the fastest growing.
Right.
It's got this massive lower to middle class population, and these folks are increasingly educated.
Right.
And crucially, they are aspirational.
Yes.
And this is a major driver of economic activity when you have people who want to buy things,
Right.
when they want to improve their lives.
Yeah.
That is the fuel for growth.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that people don't necessarily realize is just how quickly India has been climbing the ranks in terms of overall economic size.
Yeah.
We're looking at a $3.72 trillion economy, which puts it at the fifth largest globally.
Wow.
And that has happened, obviously over time, but much faster than many people anticipated.
Yeah, it's been accelerating.
Yeah, it's been accelerating. And also, it's the third largest by purchasing power parity on a per capita basis.
Interesting.
So can you explain that a little bit for those who don't know? Because I think that's a really key distinction.
Yeah, purchasing power parity, we call it PPP. It's essentially a way to look at, like, what can that money buy you in India versus other countries? So you have your nominal GDP, which is just the sheer size of the economy. Right. But then PPP per capita adjusts that for price differences. So it gives you a better idea of the actual living standards and the real economic strength of the country.
Yeah, so it kind of puts things into perspective because it's not just about the number.
Yeah. It's about what you can do with that number.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now when we look at how India's economy is actually structured, it's actually been going through quite a shift, right? It wasn't always this way.
That's right. Yeah.
So how would you describe that transition?
So the article highlights this transition from what used to be a very agriculture-heavy economy to now services really dominating.
Yeah.
Currently services account for about 53% of India's economy, while agriculture has actually come down to around 18%.
Wow.
And then industry makes up the remaining roughly 28%.
Okay, and then within that industry piece, this is where we get to this focus on manufacturing.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is really kind of, I think, the point of this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
So where does that stand right now?
So right now, manufacturing contributes about 17% to India's GDP.
Okay.
And it employs a lot of people, like 27.3 million.
That's a lot of jobs.
Right. It's huge.
Yeah.
But, the government has set some really ambitious goals for this sector.
Yeah.
Their goal is to actually boost manufacturing to $1 trillion by 2025.
Wow.
Which would mean that manufacturing would be about 25% of their GDP.
Wow.
Yeah, it's huge.
And overall, they're aiming for a $5 trillion GDP by 2025.
Right.
With an annual growth rate of roughly 7.2%.
Yeah, very ambitious.
Very ambitious.
Yeah.
And this is where the article makes this really interesting argument.
Yeah.
That, services alone can't sustain this level of growth.
Right.
Just given India's population size and, the demographics.
Yeah, you need to create jobs.
You need to create jobs. You need to diversify the economy.
Exactly.
And that's where manufacturing comes in.
Right.
So what are they actually doing to try and make this happen?
Right. So the article highlights a couple of key initiatives
Mm-hmm.
that the government has put in place.
Yeah.
So the first one is this Make in India program, which was launched back in 2014. And that was really this first big push to try to make India a global manufacturing hub.
Right. So this is kind of the one that we all heard about when this initiative first launched.
Right.
Yeah.
And they introduce all sorts of incentives to try to get companies to come to India, both domestic and international companies, to set up shop and start making things in India.
Yeah.
So you had things like concessional loans, tax breaks, all sorts of things to try to make it attractive to manufacture in India.
And then came, I think it was 2020, Atma Nirbhar Bharat.
Right, yeah.
So this is the Self-Reliant India campaign.
Yeah.
So what prompted that shift?
So that was a big shift.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it was driven by, what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic with these global supply chain disruptions.
Right. Everyone kind of realized they were reliant on other places.
Exactly.
For critical components of lots of different things.
Yeah. And India really, I think, felt that, they needed to be more self-sufficient.
Right.
And it was under that kind of broad vision of being self-reliant that they launched the Production-Linked Incentive Scheme.
Okay.
Or, as you said, PLI.
PLI, okay.
And they launched this across 14 critical sectors.
Wow. So this was a really big commitment.
This was a big commitment.
Yeah.
With over 1.97 lakh crore rupees.
Wow.
Which is over 26 billion US dollars.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do these PLI schemes actually work? What's the underlying principle?
So the basic idea is that they want to incentivize companies to increase their manufacturing output, but they do it in a way that's linked to production targets.
Okay, so it's not just a handout. It's like...
It's not just a handout. You have to actually produce.
You have to do something.
You have to show results.
Right.
And the idea is that this will attract investments. This will encourage companies to bring in cutting-edge technologies, to become more efficient, and ultimately to be more competitive on the global stage.
So what areas are these PLI schemes targeting? You said 14 key sectors, so what are they?
So it's a pretty diverse list.
Yeah.
It includes things like mobile manufacturing and specified electronic components.
Okay.
The guts of your smartphone.
Yeah, so we're not just talking about assembling finished products. We're talking about...
making the components themselves.
Yeah.
And then you've got critical key starting materials for pharmaceuticals.
Okay.
Manufacturing of medical devices.
Right.
The auto industry, automobiles and auto components.
Right.
Pharmaceuticals themselves, specialty steel, telecom, and networking products. All the backbone of our digital infrastructure. Yeah. Electronic and technology products more broadly. White goods.
White goods, like what kind of things?
So that's like air conditioners, LEDs.
Okay.
Food processing, textiles, and within textiles, there's a focus on man-made fibers. And technical textiles, high-efficiency solar photovoltaic modules. Right. Advanced chemistry cell batteries. So these are like the batteries that go in electric vehicles. Right. And even drones. Drones and drone components.
So they're really thinking about the future.
They are thinking about the future.
Yeah. It's a very comprehensive list.
It is.
But are these schemes actually working?
That's the good question, right?
Right. Are we seeing results?
So according to the article, the early results are pretty promising. Okay. So by November 2023, they'd already attracted over 95,000 crore rupees in investments.
Okay, and these are specifically through the PLI schemes?
Through the PLI schemes. Okay. And over 746 applications had been approved.
Wow.
And what's really interesting is that the expectation is that these big companies, these anchor units that are being set up in all these sectors, they're going to create a whole ecosystem of smaller suppliers and vendors. Yeah.
And that's going to be largely within the MSME sector, the micro, small and medium enterprises.
Right. So you're talking about like small businesses benefiting from this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that could have a really big impact on jobs.
Yeah.
And local economies.
So it's not just about these big companies coming in, it's about the ripple effect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The article even touches on how this could benefit
Yeah.
Banking, financial services, and insurance, the BFSI sector,
Yeah.
with the rise of fintech and hyper-personalized banking solutions.
Right, because as these companies grow,
Yeah.
they need more financial
They
services.
need loans, they need
all that.
insurance, all that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've talked about kind of the investment figures and the broad idea, but are there any specific sectors where we're seeing like particularly strong results so far?
Yeah, there are a few standouts that the article highlights.
Okay.
So mobile phone manufacturing, for example.
India is now the second largest mobile phone manufacturer globally.
Wow.
After China.
Okay.
They've shipped over 2 billion phones between 2014 and 2022.
That's a lot of phones.
A lot of phones.
Yeah.
With a 23% average annual growth rate.
Wow. So that's significant growth.
That is massive growth.
Yeah.
And we're seeing big companies, global players, shifting their production to India.
Right.
Like Foxconn.
Yeah.
They're aiming to make India account for 25% of Apple's production.
Wow.
In the near future.
And these are like iPhones that are being exported around the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Made in India.
Made in India.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's the big deal.
So that's a really significant change in the global electronics landscape.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is.
What other sectors are they looking at?
So another area where they're already strong
Yeah.
is pharmaceuticals.
Right.
India is known as the pharmacy of the world.
Yeah.
And they're the third largest global producer of pharmaceuticals by volume, accounting for over 20% of the global supply of generic medicines.
Wow.
The auto sector is also doing really well. It's the third largest automotive market globally and projected to double in size.
Wow.
By the end of 2024.
So they're already huge.
They're already huge.
And they're going to be even bigger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the article also highlights electronic manufacturing services, or EMS, and renewable energy as these kind of sunrise industries.
Right.
With a lot of potential for India.
So we're seeing growth in these kind of well-established sectors, like pharmaceuticals, but also these newer sectors as well.
That's right.
Yeah, which is good. It's a diverse.
It's a good sign.
It's a healthy sign.
Yeah.
So the article then goes on to talk about industrial revolutions.
Right.
So how does that historical context relate to what's happening in India today?
So I think it's really important to understand that these industrial revolutions, they've been the major turning points in human history. Yeah.
They've driven innovation, they've reshaped the global economy, and they've really kind of determined who are the global leaders.
Right.
So the article kind of gives us this quick recap of the first industrial revolution, which was powered by the steam engine.
Right.
The second industrial revolution, which brought us mass production with the assembly line.
Right.
And then the third industrial revolution, which was the digital age with computers and the early stages of automation.
Right. And now we're in the fourth, which I think is probably the most relevant to what's happening in India today.
Exactly, yeah.
So how would you characterize the fourth industrial revolution?
So the fourth industrial revolution is all about these new technologies, like the Internet of Things. So IoT, artificial intelligence, AI, big data analytics, advanced robotics, and widespread automation.
Right. So it's like all these things kind of coming together.
Yeah, they're all converging.
And when you apply those technologies to manufacturing, you get what's called smart manufacturing.
Okay.
So think about a factory where machines can talk to each other through the Internet of Things.
Okay.
Using AI to predict when they need maintenance, optimizing the whole production line.
Right. So it's not just about machines doing the work. It's about the machines being smart.
It's about the machines being smart.
Exactly.
And the article suggests that this could actually give emerging economies, like India, an advantage.
Yeah, I think the argument is that these new technologies, these interconnected systems, they can actually level the playing field.
Right.
Because it gives emerging economies the opportunity to maybe leapfrog some of the traditional, more capital-intensive stages of industrial development that the developed countries had to go through.
Right.
So India could adapt these technologies to its own specific needs.
And scale, and maybe even bypass some of the legacy infrastructure challenges that the developed countries have.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
But, it's not always smooth sailing.
No, it's not.
Right. I mean, the article does touch on some recent economic headwinds that India has been facing.
Yeah.
So what are some of the challenges?
So they've seen a little bit of a slowdown
Yeah.
in the overall growth rate.
Mm-hmm.
Inflation has been sticky.
Right.
Consumption has dipped a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And liquidity in the financial system has tightened.
Yeah.
Partly due to higher interest rates.
Right. So they're facing some of the same challenges as everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, it's a global economic situation.
Yeah. But they haven't taken steps to address this, right?
Yeah, so the article highlights the budget 2025.
Okay.
Which was recently presented by the finance minister.
Yeah.
And this budget is really seen as a key set of measures to address these issues and try to get growth back on track.
So what are some of the specific things that they're doing?
So they're doing a lot of different things.
Yeah.
There's a big emphasis on infrastructure development, strengthening defense capabilities, and investing in renewable energy projects.
Right. So they're really kind of focusing on these long-term investments.
Right. Building for the future.
Yeah.
And they're doing that through increased government capital expenditure.
Okay.
So they're actually putting money into these projects to try to stimulate savings and boost consumption among the middle class. They've raised the taxable income exemption limit from 7 lakh to 12 lakh.
Okay, so they're putting more money in people's pockets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then both the government and the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, have been taking steps to inject more liquidity into the financial markets.
So this is kind of like encouraging banks to lend more, encouraging lending, encouraging investment.
Right.
And were there any specific provisions in the budget that really kind of targeted the manufacturing sector?
Yeah, so they've taken further steps to provide more tax certainty for the electronic manufacturing sector. They've expanded the Make in India exemptions to a wider range of products.
Okay, like what kind of things?
So this includes LCD and LED televisions.
Okay.
Looms.
Looms.
Yeah. So the machines that are used to make textiles.
Okay.
Various textiles themselves.
Okay.
Lithium-ion batteries.
Yeah.
And those are used in mobile phones and electric vehicles.
Right.
They're promoting maintenance, repair, and overhaul.
Okay.
Or MRO in the shipbuilding industry.
Okay.
And crucially, they've granted exemptions on import duties
Hmm.
for 36 life-saving drugs.
Okay.
And they've also allocated this huge amount of money, 1.5 lakh crores.
Wow.
As long-term, 50-year interest-free loans to state governments.
Okay.
So that the states can invest in their own infrastructure projects.
Right. So it's not just the federal government. It's also...
It's a partnership.
Yeah, it's a partnership.
Yeah.
And they've even got a new scheme for the aviation sector.
Yeah, the UDAN 2.0.
UDAN 2.0.
Yeah.
And that's aiming to connect 120 new destinations and carry an additional 4 crore passengers.
Exact.
And in a big move, they're now allowing private participation in the nuclear power sector.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah, through amendments to the civil nuclear liability law.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a very comprehensive package of intervention.
Yeah, they're really trying to cover all the bases.
Yeah. But as the article points out, it's not all about budget announcements.
It's not just about the budget.
Right. There's a lot more.
There's a whole ecosystem that needs to come together.
So what are some of those other factors that are contributing to this growth story?
So the PLI schemes, they're ongoing and they're expanding. And there's actually some upcoming ones specifically for the telecom sector.
Okay.
And those are focusing on localizing hardware production.
Right. So reducing their reliance on imports.
Exactly. And then you've got all these advancements.
Yeah.
Industrial Revolution 4.0 technologies, particularly in AI, artificial intelligence. And those are going to have a big impact on India's IT sector.
Which is already very strong.
Which is already world-class.
Yeah.
And there's this growing collaboration between the government and the private sector on all these AI initiatives.
Okay.
There's a big push to develop a domestic semiconductor chip manufacturing ecosystem.
Right. So this is like kind of like what Taiwan does.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's even initiatives to deploy DeepSeek AI on Indian servers and partnering with companies like NVIDIA.
NVIDIA, the chip maker?
Yeah, for GPUs, graphics processing units.
Right. So they're really kind of trying to get on the cutting edge of this technology.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the overall outlook, at least in the article, seems pretty optimistic.
Yeah. The article concludes with this prediction. That India is going to be the 3rd largest economy globally.
Wait, when?
by 2030.
2030, that's not very far away.
It's not far away.
Yeah.
And they're saying this isn't just a temporary blip.
Right.
This is potentially the start of what they're calling India's century.
Wow. India's century.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, having gone through this whole deep dive, what would you say are the most important takeaways?
So I think the key things to remember are the sheer scale and ambition of what India is doing. They're really trying to transform their economy.
Yeah.
And they're doing it with this huge population that's increasingly aspirational.
Yeah, they're not just content to stay where they are.
Right.
They want to improve their lives.
They want to be a global power.
Yeah.
The shift to manufacturing is really strategic.
Yeah.
And they're backing it up with real government support. Yeah.
Through Make in India and these PLI schemes across all these different industries.
Yeah, it's a very targeted approach.
It's very targeted, very strategic.
Yeah.
And then the potential of the fourth industrial revolution to really kind of accelerate all this.
Right, because it's not just about doing the same things that other countries have done.
Right.
It's about taking advantage of these new technologies.
It's about leapfrogging.
Yeah.
And getting ahead of the curve.
Yeah, it's really fascinating.
It is. It's a really interesting story.
Yeah, and I think it's one that we all need to be paying attention to.
Absolutely.
Because it's going to have huge implications for the global landscape.
It already is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, I think this is a good point to leave you with a question.
Yeah, like that.
Given all these advancements, all these ambitious targets, and all the potential disruptions on the horizon.
What do you think will be the single biggest unforeseen challenge?
Interesting.
Or the most unexpected opportunity?
Ooh, I like that.
That India might encounter as they try to achieve their full economic potential over the next decade.
It's a big question.
It's a big question.
And I think it's one that, we'll all be watching to see how it plays out.
Yeah, because this is a story that's still being written.
Absolutely.
It's going to be very interesting to see what happens.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's another deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Appreciate it.
And we'll see you all next time.
See you later.
Bye. Bye.